Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Princess Interrupted, the podcast. I'm your host, Allison Ziggy, and today we're going to be diving into a hot topic, breaking generational curses. This is a hot topic that gets thrown a lot around the spiritual community, and you always hear about you're breaking generational curses, you're creating new patterns. But we're going to dive in today to what generational curses are, where they originate, and if you are or do come from a family where you come from a line of generational curses, what you can do to break these patterns once and for all and create new standards for yourself in love and your relationships. This is my friend Bubbles, who has decided to join me for the recording of this podcast episode. She's taking Miko's place today. Breaking generational curses. First things first. What is a generational curse? For the purpose of this podcast episode today, I'm going to be specifically talking about generational curses as they pertain to relationships and dating. But generational curses are these burdens, essentially, that are passed down from generation to generation. It can be addictions. It can be a stream of broken relationships. It's a mental illness, health conditions, poverty. These are things that are passed down, belief systems, experiences of life that you consciously don't want to experience, and you want to forge a new path and create new standards, but it feels like you're just trapped in this cycle. And this is where there's all these sayings about how limited you are based on where you come from. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. For the sake of this episode, we're going to be talking specifically about dating patterns and relationships and how you can not repeat those cycles. One of the ones that is very obvious, evident, is divorce. You've probably heard that 50% of marriages end in divorce. Looking at the people who are getting divorced, are they coming from lineages where divorce was accepted and where divorce was the norm? Are these people coming from parents of divorce? The statistics are really alarming. There was a study that was conducted by Peter Amato and Danelle Deboer. It indicated that if a woman's parents were divorced, her odds of divorce increased by 69%. And if both a husband and a wife's parents were divorced, the risk of divorce increased by 189%. I just want to take a second for that statistic because I come from a lineage of divorce. I am talking about this episode because I'm breaking generational curses. And so the information that I'm sharing with you today is as a result of the information that I've learned as a life and a dating coach, but it's also things that I've had to apply into my own life because I grew up into a family hearing statistics like this, where I'm 69% more likely to get divorced because my parents were. I do just want to add a caveat. I am of the belief that you are never doomed. I am of the belief that where you come from does not determine where you are ultimately headed. I also want to say, in my perspective, divorce is not the worst possible outcome. The worst possible outcome is being in a relationship that stifles your soul and isn't ultimately right for you, or a dangerous situation. Marriage, divorce, these things impact men and women differently because of societal expectations and constructs and expectations and all of these things. But it's really important to open this dialogue and say, okay, where you come from does not determine where you're going, but it is your responsibility to heal your lineage and to decide what you want to be true for you and to run after it as if your life depends on it. If I hadn't done the inner work, this would be a severe likelihood for me because I had a tremendous amount of inner work that I had to do as a result of my upbringing and where I came from. That's why I became so into this work. I do believe that there are certain advantages, quote unquote, to being born without dealing with generational curses and things like this. But I also believe that our biggest struggles can turn into our biggest gifts. So if you are someone who the first 7 years of your life weren't so hot, it doesn't mean that you're doomed. It means that you probably have some gifts spiritually, psychically, as a result of the experiences that you've overcame. So let's dive in. That's a little bit about what generational curses are. These familial patterns that are undesired, that you don't want to keep repeating, but there has been a cycle in your family. For me, as I shared, my parents and my grandparents were divorced. This was a pattern that I had no desire in repeating, and even though I really deeply desired to be in a relationship, it never worked because I didn't have the belief systems or the examples in my immediate reality to support the kind of love that I wanted to attract. That's where a lot of this comes into play. Where do generational curses come from in general? There's a lot of different perspectives that you can look at this through. Like, how do these originate? Who has these? There's a lot from the Bible actually saying that this is like unresolved sin, unresolved trauma that passes down from family to family. There's also like spiritual forces that could be at play. When you think of a family curse, just when I was doing my research, a lot was coming up around the Bible. There's a lot of different Bible verses around this. It's a thing. The way that I look at this through the research that I've done and through the training and through the education that I have, I look at this as a continual repeating of subconscious patterns playing out generation after generation. Here is why I say that. Your subconscious brain was primarily programmed between the ages of 0 to 7 years old. Your subconscious brain creates 95% of your waking reality, and from the ages of 0 to 7, you are essentially a sponge absorbing everything that is happening in your environment. That is where most of your core beliefs come from. That is where your fundamental understanding of the world comes from. If you come from a family where things were great and fantastic and there's no rewiring, you probably don't need to dive too deeply into this inner work because you probably got a really solid foundation from your early upbringing. But if you didn't, if you're like me and your parents got divorced during those years, my parents got divorced when I was 3 and it was an ugly custody battle from there on out. So I had a lot of rewiring to do. This is where you have to take ownership back of your life. I'm going to talk about ways that you can actually reprogram your brain and kind of the reason that we're not quite as doomed if you fall into this camp with me, as researchers once believed. From a subconscious perspective, your brain absorbs everything from 0 to 7. This is where your core beliefs are coming from. So think about your parents. Think about their lives from ages 0 to 7. And then think about your grandparents. Think about their lives from ages 0 to 7. Your great-grandparents, their lives from 0 to 7. If nobody's been doing this work, your family lineage is just being determined by attachments from traumatized 7-year-olds. Pretty scary to think. This is how it gets passed down. From 0 to 7, your entire world, your parents are basically God. Your parents tell you what is, what isn't. They tell you everything. You learn everything from your parents. And when they're teaching you their belief systems that were passed down from their own traumatic experiences, it's just continually repeating the same cycles. The reason that these fundamental years are so important as well, we hear all of the time in dating about attachment styles. Your initial attachment style was created as a result of your relationship with your parents, specifically your mother. There was a study conducted. The attachment theory was originally founded by John Bowlby, and the project was expanded on by someone named Mary Ainsworth. Mary Ainsworth conducted an experiment, and it was called the strange situation. The strange situation involved separating mothers and infants and then seeing how they responded when the mother left the room. The mothers and the babies would go into the room and the mom would leave, and they would track how the baby responded. And she would test the attachment theories in terms of if this was secure, anxious, or avoidant. The thing that was really interesting is at the time of this study, Mary Ainsworth's study was conducted in 1969, and she did it off of the research of Jonathan Bowlby, so that was earlier. But it indicated that early attachment experiences really significantly influence someone's ability to form and maintain healthy relationships later on in life, specifically romantic relationships, friendships, work relationships. Now, I remember learning about this in college, and I remember reading the book Attached and learning about the attachment theories. But what always bothered me is that it said that it was really hard to change your attachment style. That if you had a specific attachment style, it was likely going to be something that you had to deal with for the rest of your life. Before I had done a lot of healing work, I used to get really frustrated when I would hear things like this because it felt like I was being punished for having trauma. Like, come on, my parents got divorced and now it's going to be even harder for me to find love. Like, how is that fair? But at the end of the day, when you do this healing work, it gives you a higher level of awareness, and I also believe it gives you a higher level of appreciation. I'm not one for needless suffering, but I am one for if you have had these experiences and it's something that you've actively had to work through, I believe that you have the ability to become an even better partner because of the work that you've had to put into it. We're going to go into why you're also not doomed when I talk about this later in the episode. There's a lot riding on our early lives, as you can tell. So the way that I've always viewed generational curses on a spiritual level is I believe that we are able to live out the legacy of our ancestors who didn't have the same opportunities that we did. They had a certain experience on this planet based on when they were born, where they were born, how much money their parents had, certain things that were fixed. And their soul's mission was different. Basically, we're able to live the legacy of the people who are no longer with us and who weren't able to live out what they ultimately wanted to do. And their unrealized dreams that are left behind are able to live on through you. I experienced this firsthand when I went on a solo trip to Italy. My grandmother had never been on a plane. She had 5 children before the time that she was 30 years old, which I can't even imagine, fathom. This woman got divorced and had to file for bankruptcy just to support her family because the dad was in and out of the picture and not financially supporting her children the way that she needed to be supported. When I went to Italy, it felt like this reclamation of soul. It felt like this calling, and she had called me out there, and I still feel like this to this day. The day my grandmother died was the first time I ever touched the Pacific Ocean, and I just feel very connected to her when I travel, specifically my solo travels. It was because I was willing to live on her legacy and let her kind of live on through me that I was able to have this experience where I was able to change what I received from her. So instead of receiving the trauma and the story of the divorce and the abusive relationships and the poverty, I was able to separate and determine a new kind of legacy that I wanted her to be able to leave behind. It's not that she didn't live out her legacy on this planet in terms of, I believe that her main legacy was family, and it was her children, and it was her grandchildren. And I look back and she's one of the kindest people I've ever met in my entire life. But I look at the bigger legacy in terms of the woman wasn't able to have a career. She wasn't able to, her purpose was the family. So her purpose is able to live on through the family is the way that I look at it. And so that was the way I was able to shift and transmute and alchemize some of this curse work. And if I'm really talking about my own experiences, I know I got a little clinical in the beginning, but if I'm going to share my experiences with breaking curses, when I went to Italy, my grandmother had never had a funeral, and I took a little bit of her ashes, a very tiny amount because I was paranoid about it. And I took a little bit of her ashes and a crystal, and I journaled, and I just sat at Lake Como, and I honored her life, and I said goodbye to her. And I just also remember breaking the curse. There's a curse that had been joked about in my family, this curse that had gone on for generations. My parents were divorced, my grandparents were divorced, but then also my mom's 2 sisters had traumatic experiences and relationships. One was widowed and one was never married. We would always joke about this curse. And for me, it was always disheartening. All the people in my life were single. All the people in my family were single. It felt like I was doomed, even though I really desperately wanted this relationship. But it felt like this moment, this reclamation of power of just being this isn't how it's going to go. This is not how my life is going to go. This ends here. I don't have a desire to perpetuate this cycle. And it felt like this ceremonial experience of deciding that my life got to be different and I didn't need to follow that same path. I did this through a ritualistic practice in Italy, which was where she was from, and never got a chance to see. And that was a calling that was pulled forth by my soul. That was my first ever international solo trip, which I was encouraged on going on by my coach at the time. I don't know that I would have had the courage to do that on my own, but I had the support to follow through on what my heart was pulling me to do. When I look back, that's the legacy that my grandmother gave me. I also want to say, when she died, all I had from her was this bracelet, and I'm allergic to nickel. I mean, it was costume jewelry. It was this little bracelet, and it would break me out every time that I put it on. And when I was leaving Philadelphia and moving to New York, this was right after my Italy trip, I bought this pair of earrings to represent my grandmother. And I was like, these are from her. And so I was able to create new associations to what she left behind that felt more aligned for me. So are these from my grandmother? I technically bought them, but I felt like she was really energetically supporting me during this time. And this felt like a better way to remember her than something that I couldn't even wear. And I threw it away because I was this ceremonious, This is not how I'm choosing to remember you. This is. And I feel like that's so symbolic of the breaking of the curses too. Like, even like you think about transmutation and you think about alchemy, and it's like throwing away a nickel bracelet that was like hurting me and an allergy, and getting pearls and diamonds and something that was like vintage, and it just reminded me of her. This is the way that I equate breaking curses, not just coming up with a new way to work with it in your mind, but a way to connect to your ancestors and to honor the path of what they've experienced, and to carry that with you and never forget the lessons, but also avoid the same path and decide that you get to go a different way, and you get to have them support you. Even though they haven't walked that same path, they're able to help you through the spiritual and energetic realms. So if you want to do this in your own life, you're like, okay, Allison, like my family, there's some generational curses that I'd really like to break. What do I need to do? First things first is you need to have awareness around it, plus the desire to change. This is the first step to anything. Anybody who's looking to work with me, I'm like, you need awareness around what you want to change, plus a desire to change it. That is why coaching exists. Specifically in dating, if you know that you're operating from corroded programming, you're operating from belief systems that aren't going to support getting the life that you want, it's your responsibility to come up with a way to create new beliefs for yourself. The first step is awareness, and it's just really observing like what patterns are you playing out that are coming from your family that are not serving you. That is step one, first and foremost. And being the gentle observer is the best piece of advice I can give you here. Not judging yourself, not being like, oh, well, if my mom hadn't done this, and my dad, that's a victim of your life. You're not a victim of your life. You're the victor, and you're able to decide how things go from here on out. So we're not placing blame, but we are creating awareness and understanding. If somebody in your family triggers you and you can't understand why, get quiet around the sensation so that you can understand. Triggers are our greatest gifts, and it's ultimately just a chance to heal yourself and get to know yourself even deeper. So sit with that and trust that, and don't push up against it because it's just going to make it stronger. So first step, awareness. Second step, shadow work, or what I like to call immersion therapy. Let me tell you, living with my mom was the most immersive experience of shadow work I could have ever asked for, because I was forced to reprogram beliefs specifically around scarcity and money. And I was able to see exactly where they had originated. This is no shade to my mom. Again, step one, awareness. We don't blame, we observe, and we love. But I was able to see this woman, no matter how much money she had, it never felt like enough. And it was just the scarcity that had been passed down to her because she grew up in poverty. Her grandparents grew up in poverty. Her parents grew up in poverty. So this was the cycle where I was actively saying, like, I am not taking this on. I don't care how much or how little money is in my bank account. I am not going to let the way that you feel about money impact the way that I feel about myself or my bank account. This was huge. To do this when you're actively hearing the beliefs that caused the undesired results in your life, and to say, I don't want to believe this anymore. It's the shadow work. It's the diving in. It's understanding, like, why does this trigger me so much? When I was going through something difficult financially, hearing my mom stress about money was so hard for me. And we got into fights about it where I was like, oh my gosh, I like can't listen to you talk about this right now. But it only bothered me because it was touching up on the beliefs that I had, where I was trying to form new beliefs and her belief systems were fighting against it. And it was like I couldn't have the new beliefs because of what she was believing. And that's not true. That was giving over agency of my life, and that was perpetuating the same cycles. I am so grateful to her. I am so grateful for everything that she has ever done for us. I am so grateful that she felt safe enough to share these fears. And I'm so grateful that I can love her and I can help create new beliefs through the way that I live my life. But it's not my job to reprogram my mother. My beliefs are my responsibility. And I take that incredibly seriously. When I think about the greater context of the world and the life and the things that I'm looking to create, it is selfish to not upgrade my programming. It is selfish to play out those same tired cycles and to let this continue on any longer. And the same is true for you, not even in a grandiose sense, but in the sense of like, where are there patterns that are playing out where you're like, this has happened so many generations in my family, and I don't want this to continue to be true anymore. This information was the missing piece for me. So we learned about attachment theory, and we learned about whatever attachment style you have, you're pretty much fixed in it, okay? So I was disorganized. I had anxious attachment and avoidant tendencies. Finding love was incredibly difficult for me because it felt so unsafe to my nervous system. But there's a thing called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity, while it's been around, it seems like it was discovered in 1948. It seems like there's sources that cite it back to the 1700s in Italy. There's a fellow by the name of Michael Merzenich, and back in the 1970s, he was doing experiments to prove the exact opposite. So he was trying to say that the brain was fixed, compartmentalized, specialized, and fixed. But he didn't. He discovered neuroplasticity. Now, the exciting thing is that this experiment, his discovery happened after Mary Ainsworth's discovery. This was happening a little bit simultaneously, but this happened right after her experiment. Even this idea, like, you are not fixed in any of your beliefs. That is a belief that it is harder to change these things. There is so much more information on this than we used to have. You can form new neural pathways. So neural pathways, when you keep thinking a belief, it reinforces a groove in your brain. It creates a neural pathway. If you keep waking up and thinking there's not enough money, that's a neural pathway. You keep waking up and you're thinking, I'm going to be single forever. That's a neural pathway. You wake up and thinking all the good men are taken, men are trash, men suck. Those are neural pathways. And those are your predominant neural pathways because those are the thoughts that you have been thinking. If you want to create new thoughts, you need to introduce repetition, but there are ways that you can create new neural pathways. Now, this is where I come into play because I work with my clients primarily on upgrading the subconscious mind, but then also pairing it with the nervous system regulation so that these new beliefs not only start to be true and you start to attract the experience of them being true in your reality, but it also feels safe enough to your body that you don't sabotage or shut down and go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. This is how this is all related. So if you want to know how to form new neural pathways, hire me as your coach. I am currently enrolling new private clients. I have a link in the show notes where you can set up time with me or send me a DM if you're interested in learning more. This is where I laser focus, get clear on what limiting beliefs have been holding you back in love, help you create new beliefs. The other way that you form neural pathways is gratitude. So gratitude isn't just a nice to have. Gratitude is the active process of changing the direction of your thoughts. So if you're always inclined to see things negatively, or you're always on alert for a threat because you've had to be, because your parents had to be, because your grandparents had to be, focusing on gratitude actually shifts the direction of your thinking, and that helps you to create new neural pathways. You can also create neural pathways through doing things that stimulate your brain. So this can be learning a new language. This can be reading. Exercising can help promote increased brain activity. Anything that's dealing with art as well, just accessing different parts of your brain is huge for creating new neural pathways. And you create new neural pathways as well through repetition of creating new belief systems. There's a lot of tools that I personally use with my clients to create new beliefs, whether it's a hypnosis technique, whether it's subconscious reprogramming, but it's really just the reinforcement of the beliefs that you want to be true. And the reason this is so important is because what you believe to be true about the world is what you will perceive as happening in your external reality. If someone goes on a date and it doesn't go well, but they have a belief that love is inevitable and it's going to find me and I'm destined for great love, it's not going to impact the way you feel as much if you are operating under the assumption that all the good men are taken and dating sucks and that you're destined to be alone. Do you see how those two experiences are completely different based on the underlying belief systems that you're operating from? And the underlying belief systems that you're operating from are not only happening as a result of your life experiences, but as a result of the life experiences of your ancestors who came before you. There is a way that you can honor their lives and honor their experiences but leave behind the beliefs you no longer want to carry on. And in my opinion, that is the best form of legacy. I don't want to remember the people who came before me and blame them for my circumstances. I want to think about how resilient and incredible my grandmother was and how she was doing the absolute best that she could. I want to remember my mother and how she was just so incredibly kind and generous and responsible, and how she created such a beautiful life for herself, even when there were so many circumstances pushing up against it. Those are the things that I want to remember them for, not getting divorced because that's what happened to them. So it's time to reclaim power in your life and to realize the agency and realize that you're only limited to the degree that you believe that you're limited. And if you're hearing this and you're like ready for love, you're ready to attract soulmate love, you're ready to let things be easy, you're ready to stop trying so freaking hard trying to date from your masculine, which is only going to attract flaky men anyway, set up time with me. I currently have coaching packages that range from $400 up through 6 months, depending on what you're looking to do together. In the alignment call, we'll discuss what specifically you're working through. I also have a special if you just want to do a 1-hour session, which I'll include in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode of Princess Interrupted, the podcast. I love you so much. I'm so happy you're here. And make sure you like, subscribe, share, follow Allison Ziggy. I love you, and I'll see you for next week's episode. Mwah.